Women aren't speaking the same language anymore. We can't debate feminism or love it out loud because our words are getting lost in translation. How many women have forsaken feminism because someone told them it was the opposite of softness? These fingers don't lift anything heavier than a buck. But that doesn't mean I'm gonna set my feminist literature on fire just because someone told me I'm too delicate to hold it. Who convinced you to hate yourself? Who convinced you to hate your sister? Who convinced you to hate feminism? Could it really be wrong to learn about the nature of being a woman if you are one? To make sure we're on the same page and speaking the same language, let's learn the basics together. This is Woman's Guide to Feminism. Let's start with female agency. This video does not seek to tell you how to live your life. It doesn't take sides. It simply gives you a framework with which to see the world. It is my hope that you leave here with more questions than answers so that you can become a thoughtful, curious, and intelligent woman. What does it mean for a woman to have agency? Let's break this down. When we talk about agency, we're talking about power. Who has it, who doesn't, and most importantly, how people use it. Most people think of agency as the freedom to make your own choices and move through life on your own terms, but it's not that straightforward. Agency is rarely a concrete concept. It exists on a spectrum. On one side of the spectrum is voluntarism, the fantasy of absolute freedom where every choice is yours alone. On the other end of the spectrum is determinism, the reality that every decision is shaped by forces bigger than us. Social structures, cultural expectations, these are all the unspoken rules that dictate who gets to move freely and who doesn't. And for women, this has always been a battlefield. But does agency always have to be a war? Is it always a rebellion or a fight? Is agency resistance or is it something else? For centuries, power has been defined through the lens of the leading man, the hero, the lone wolf. He looks like Chris Hemsworth and he's kicking ass and taking names. But that is a boy fantasy and it ignores the nature of being a woman. It ignores community, sisterhood, and interdependence. Some of the most radical forms of agency don't happen in huge revolutions. They happen in the regular moments of everyday life, like caregiving or emotional labor or in conversation. But if agency isn't always resistance, then what is it? It's the art of playing the game. When you play the game, you bend the rules and find empowerment in unexpected places. But can we call something empowerment if it doesn't challenge the system? Is a woman who embraces femininity less free than one who rejects it? Are sex workers exercising choice or are they trapped by poverty? When a woman gets cosmetic surgery, is it her body, her choice, or is she appealing to the male gaze? This is where things get messy. If we say that some choices are false, that some women are wrong about their own agency, aren't we slipping into the same boy thinking that women are trying to get away from? As long as power exists, agency will always be tangled up in contradictions and it will be debated endlessly. And maybe that's the point. Maybe feminism isn't about giving you the answer. Maybe it's about asking better questions. So what now? Should we fight the power? Should we play it? What even is resistance? What does it mean to resist? Not all rebellion looks like a fight. Sometimes the most dangerous form of resistance happens inside the very system that seeks to control you. Judith Butler gave us the theory of gender performance. I want to take this moment to acknowledge the fact that Judith Butler is fine as hell. Let's continue. Her idea of gender performance changed the game for how we think about resistance. She argued that gender isn't something we are, it's something we do. It's a script that we follow. Masculinity, femininity, heterosexuality, these things only feel real because we repeat them again and again until we forget that we're acting. But here's the catch. If something has to be repeated to exist, it can also be disrupted. Resistance in this framework isn't about escaping gender norms, it's about changing them from within. Drag, for example, doesn't just exaggerate femininity, it exposes the fact that femininity itself is an act. It reminds us that gender isn't tied to biology, it's something we perform, and if we can perform it, we can also remix it, twist it, break it apart, but it's all disruption resistance. There are feminists who critique Butler's framework and argue that not all rebellion is rebellion. A woman embracing hyperfemininity, heels, lashes, lingerie, could be reclaiming power, or she could be reinforcing the system. So when does performance become rebellion, and who gets to decide? Here's where the debate stands. Can you ever truly escape social norms? Or can we only work from within them? Should feminism focus on small acts of resistance, or does it need a bigger vision, one that doesn't challenge the rules but rewrites them? The answer isn't simple, and maybe it shouldn't be. With all this talk about agency and resistance, I can't help but wonder, does every woman even dream of freedom? For so long, feminism has told us that every woman in every place, in every culture, secretly longs for the same thing, freedom. That agency is always about breaking free, about pushing back, always about resisting. But what if that isn't true? What if freedom itself isn't universal? What if it's a Western fantasy shaped by the very structures we claim to be escaping? Some feminist scholars argue that this obsession with resistance is tangled up in a liberal fantasy. It assumes that power is something to reject, when in reality, many women don't see their lives that way at all. Take the soft life versus girl boss debate. To some, choosing to be self-sufficient is a declaration of power, proof that a woman can survive, thrive, and build a life without dependence on men. To others, embracing a soft life is the ultimate flex, proof that a woman's presence alone is enough to command luxury, care, and devotion. But what happens when women begin to see each other's choices as contradictions rather than coexisting truths? And that's the problem. When women assume that agency must always look like independence, that softness is submission, or that hyper-independence is a rejection of femininity, they might be missing the point entirely. In a culture where women have been told they have to conform or resist, what if some are just choosing to move differently? What if a woman's power isn't always about breaking free, but about learning to navigate the world on her own terms, whether that means securing financial independence or mastering the art of being provided for? And isn't it a tiny bit arrogant to assume that every woman must want the same kind of power? That true freedom must always look like self-sufficiency? That codependence always means weakness? Because here's where things get messy. Feminism isn't just about thinking, it's about living. It isn't just about describing the world, it's about shaping it. So can we ever talk about a woman's agency without imposing our own biases? Can we respect a woman's choice without needing it to validate our own? Some argue that we need a new kind of feminist conversation, one that doesn't force a singular idea of empowerment onto every woman's life, but also doesn't ignore the structural realities that shape those choices. Because womanhood isn't a sealed off experience. It's fluid, it's layered, and it keeps changing. And somewhere in that complexity, we can find a way forward. One where women don't just demand freedom for themselves, but respect the ways that it can be lived. Listen, there are no easy answers, but maybe that's the point. Maybe feminism isn't about handing out freedom. Maybe it's about asking questions, keeping the conversation open, listening to each other. Because the truth is, agency doesn't have a single definition, and maybe it never should. What if the greatest limitation of feminism is feminism itself? For decades, agency has been shackled to identity. What does it mean to be a woman? How women resist? How do women exist? But what if that focus is a trap? What if it keeps feminism circling the same battles, defining agency by what already exists instead of what it could be? What if agency wasn't about identity at all? What if, instead of asking what women can do within gender norms, we stopped centering gender altogether? It's a wild concept to consider on a channel about femininity and womanhood, but I'm not threatened by conversation, so let's continue. This is the question that post-identity feminism raises. Instead of negotiating power within the world as we know it, post-identity theorists argue that true feminism lies in not being bound by gender or even identity itself. So instead of asking, what does it mean to be a woman in today's world, the real question becomes, what world could we create if we stopped defining ourselves by gender altogether? What if instead of dividing ourselves more and more with labels and pronouns, we did the exact opposite and stopped defining ourselves altogether? We live in an age where gender has been repackaged as a product, where identity is a brand, and capitalism promises liberation through self-optimization. Gender as a performance has been swallowed whole by social media and transformed into something that can be sold back to us while reinforcing the very structures it claims to dismantle. Post-identity theorists argue that feminism must move beyond the idea that simply disrupting gender norms is enough. After all, resistance still plays by the rules. It's still part of the system. But what if the game itself is the problem? What if we stop resisting and start rewriting? This idea is seductive, but it's also unsettling because it promises freedom beyond the body, beyond labels, beyond every expectation placed on us, but it also means stepping into the unknown. It means letting go of our fixed identities, our pre-written scripts, of the comfort that comes from fighting the battles that we already know. And that raises serious questions. If we move beyond gender identity, what happens to feminism and what happens to femininity? Can we imagine a collective feminism that isn't based on shared identity? Maybe the answer isn't to reject identity completely, but to loosen its grip, to see that it's not a cage, but a doorway. Maybe agency isn't just about escaping old structures, but about using them as weapons to carve out something new. The world is changing faster than ever, and feminism, if it wants to stay seductive, if it wants to stay dangerous, has to keep up. For much of women's history, agency was imagined as the rejection of structures that tried to contain women. Resistance meant burning the whole thing down and never looking back. But real power doesn't just turn to ash because you set it on fire. It reinvents itself. It puts on a new mask and waits for you to think that you've won. And that's when you can't fight the power because you don't know what power looks like anymore. And you can't fight the enemy that you don't know. Let me give you an example from earlier. Look at the rise of the girl boss and how it sells you female empowerment. Women rejected the idea that a woman's worth was tied to motherhood and male approval, but instead of truly eradicating those systems, they just got rebranded. The same structures that excluded women from power now sell empowerment back to them through productivity culture, corporate feminism, and the pressure to have it all. The expectations didn't disappear, they adapted. Instead of being told to stay home and serve, women are now told they have to hustle, monetize every aspect of their life, sell those lifestyles to other women. Those women become slaves to trends and buy into produced femininity. And then everyone burns out, rejects the girl boss, runs to the soft life, and the whole cycle starts over again. It's a revolving door that always leads back to a new form of control. First, it was break the glass ceiling. Then, when women burned out from overwork, the pendulum swung to soft life and trad wife fantasies, only for those two to become monetized. Now, femininity is a product again, sold in the form of hyper-curated lifestyles, aesthetics, and romanticized dependence. And when that illusion cracks, the rejection begins again. The girl boss, the trad wife, the soft life. Each era is just a new mask for the same system of consumption and control. Women are always told they finally won, and then they realize they were just playing a different role in the same script. So how do we rethink agency in an era where empowerment itself has been commodified? Neoliberalism has rewritten the script of freedom. It repackages self-sufficiency as a brand and turns empowerment into a sales pitch. I'm so sorry, I have a lisp. Neoliberalism has rewritten the script of freedom. It repackages self-sufficiency as a brand and turns empowerment into a sales pitch. Buy the right thing so you can optimize yourself into the perfect woman. And you too can be the dream girl, have the rich man, live the soft life. Beneath all of that marketing, the reality is so dark. The bonds of sisterhood are unraveling and we are being pushed farther away into individualism. The very structures that claim to uplift women are the ones that divide them. So where does that leave female agency? Can we reclaim empowerment? What does sisterhood look like in a world that insists we stand alone? How do we talk about agency when the line between freedom and exploitation has never been more blurred? Feminism has always been about imagining a future beyond the constraints of the present. But in a world where everything is for sale, where even resistance itself has been turned into a product, how do we create something that can't be bought? As I talk to my conservative friends and my liberal friends, everyone seems to be saying the same thing. I want to make the world a better place, and I want to be a good person. The problem is that we're made to see each other as the enemy. Even social media tells us to fight in the comments to boost our engagement. But I'm a born American and I grew up being taught how to understand other people's points of view through having basic conversation skills. You're not going to get me to hate someone just because they have different views than me. I'm tired. I'm gonna go read a book. Love you, bitch. Later. Follow me, like, subscribe, do all the things. Oof.